The week's end top stories at NBR. Exploratory drilling for gold begins north of Lake Taupo. Government proposes changes to lending rules, rewarding staff with shares. And there's more coming right up. Kia ora and welcome to NBR This Week, 100% subscriber funded and proudly brought to you by you, as is every story at nbr.co.nz. Friday's top business stories, then a look back over the week's top stories from our daily video business news bulletin, NBR Today. It's Friday, March 11th. I'm Paul Brennan. Thanks again for joining us. The government is proposing to make changes to lending rules that critics have argued have prevented bona fide borrowers getting access to credit. A drop in lending, particularly for mortgage finance, has been blamed on the Credit Contracts and Consumer Finance Act, which came into effect on December 1st last year. While the government is going to make changes to the regulations and responsible lending code the new law set up, it does not necessarily believe they are the main reason for a drop-off in lending. Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister David Clark said the Reserve Bank's December figures highlighted seasonal variation as a prominent cause of a drop in lending that month. A bid by listed motorhome and tourism company Tourism Holdings to acquire 100% of Australia's Apollo Tourism and Leisure Limited may yet hit a snag with the Commerce Commission, as predicted by some at the time the proposed deal was made public. In the Commission's statement of issues released this morning, Friday morning, it said its preliminary view was the competitive constraint provided by New Zealand's other motorhome rental operators would be insufficient. Both Apollo and Tourism Holdings supply motorhome and campervan rental services to domestic and international tourists in New Zealand. Fonterra is shutting down its joint venture in India with marketing company Future Consumer, saying the COVID pandemic had disrupted the business. The business was started in 2018 as a way to build a presence in India, which has restricted access for New Zealand dairy products. Fonterra's Asia-Pacific Chief Executive Judith Swales said the joint venture's 22 employees would receive appropriate entitlements. She said the last few years have been challenging for the joint venture, with COVID-19 causing significant disruption to the Indian market. Kiwi tech investors need to get used to the idea of rewarding staff with shares if they want to recruit and retain key people. A panel of experts has told the New Zealand Shareholders Association the market for talent was global and firms had to be relevant in the economies they were recruiting in. Susan Peterson, chairman of cinema software company Vista, said a large component of salary packages in the Northern Hemisphere was equity, and while New Zealand firms could match the base pay, offering the same short-term incentives was harder. Even relatively junior staff were receiving restricted stock units, and some skilled people were expecting $500,000 worth, Susan Peterson told the panel. The full details of those stories and more are at nbr.co.nz right now. I'm Paul Brennan. This is NBR This Week. A look back now at the week's top NBR business stories from our daily video business news bulletin, NBR Today. From Monday, pay gap peer pressure. An initiative that invites New Zealand companies to publicly declare their gender and ethnic pay gaps is about to kick off next week, with 50 medium to large employers signed up and the hopes of a further 50 to 100 companies to join by the 50th anniversary of the Equal Pay Act, October 20th, 2022. Mind the Gap is a voluntary initiative that seeks to use peer pressure to get companies signed on with full public disclosures about their gender and ethnic pay gaps. The warehouse chief HR officer, Richard Parker, is one that had signed up to Mind the Gap in the wake of the company slowly but surely moving towards more pay transparency over a few years. He joined the NBR's Dita Daboni.
There is a gap that in these particular groupings of our employees, and that we're now comfortable putting that out publicly and not just internally. And we've got a whole lot of initiatives where we are trying to continue to close that gap.
Warehouse Chief HR Officer Richard Parker with Dita Daboni there. It's NBR This Week, the week's top 5 business stories from NBR Today. From Tuesday, responses to ComCom's competition in the grocery sector report. Some retail challengers to the supermarket duopoly are not satisfied with the recommendations of the Commerce Commission's final report on competition in the grocery sector announced today, Monday. While the Commission's final report drew a positive reaction from the Food and Grocery Council, which represents supermarket suppliers, its CEO, Catherine Rich, told NBR she was also supportive of the Minister's warning that results need to be seen or there could be more drastic action. She joined the NBR's Will Mace.
What the Commission's presented today, I don't think a lot of people really understand, but the grocery sector regulator will most likely have very wide powers to monitor, to ask for information. They'll also report publicly, regularly, which continues to shine the spotlight on the issues we've been raising.
Food and Grocery Council CEO Catherine Rich with Will Mace there. It's NBR This Week, the week's top 5 business stories from NBR's daily video business news bulletin, NBR Today. From Wednesday, Threewaters Working Group reports back. The Threewaters Working Group on Representation, Governance and Accountability has reported back to Local Government Minister Nanaia Mahuta after being set up late last year in response to widespread concerns the government's proposal would undermine local democracy and dilute the ownership rights of local authorities. The working group report supports the consolidation of existing water assets held by the country's local authorities into the 4 WSEs. A key recommendation was to set up a public shareholding model which clarified the ownership of the water service entities, with councils owning all shares in them on behalf of their communities. It's NBR This Week, the week's top 5 business stories from NBR Today. From Thursday, new public media entity. RNZ and TVNZ will not be smashed together, as some have feared, but the two vastly different organisations will be contained together within a new public media entity, the Minister of Broadcasting, Chris Farfoy, said today, Thursday. The autonomous Crown entity would be ideally operational by July 1st, 2023.
What is constant is that New Zealand's public media is trusted and strong and has served us extremely well over the decades. Despite that, we need to ensure Kiwis can continue to rely on that trust and strength as they continue to rapidly change the ways that they watch, they listen and they read.
Minister of Broadcasting Chris Farfoy. This is NBR This Week. Now we're up to Friday's top story. An ASX-listed mining minnow has begun exploratory drilling for gold near Lake Ohakuri, north of Lake Taupo, in a joint venture with New Zealand company ZX Gold. Lavoto Resources, which raised Australian $6 million through an initial public offer at Australian 20 cents a share in December, confirmed the start of drilling to the ASX yesterday, Thursday. Managing Director Ron Heeks said previous exploration dating back to the 1970s had found large areas of low-grade gold mineralisation, and the goal of the drilling program was to discover its source. The full details of those stories and more are at nbr.co.nz right now. This weekend at NBR, in Fact or Fiction on Saturday, Brent Edwards and Grant Walker debate the week in politics, while in his weekly book review on Sunday, Neville Gibson looks at modern-day wisdom from the ancient world, how the Stoic philosophers developed new ways of coping with life's troubles. I'm Paul Brennan. Thanks for watching and listening to NBR This Week. Have a great weekend. Join me again from Monday around lunchtime for the morning's NBR Trending Stories. Then again from around 5:30 Monday for another NBR Today.